It's Dr. Joyce Alberts, clinical psychologist based in North Canterbury, South Island, New Zealand. I'm continuing to make a series of videos, and this is related to my own personal concerns around the harm caused to individuals, to adults, to women, to children, to families by the leadership of the Glorivale Christian community. So this would be video 3 in the series, and today I want to talk some more about Neville Cooper, who changed his name to Hopeful Christian, and give you some more background information, hopefully to help pull things together and to give you that basis of the foundation of my concerns. So just a quick recap. So the what's now known as the Glorivale Christian Community was first founded in the late 60s by Neville Cooper, who was originally from Australia. Neville Cooper established what he refers to as a church. It was a group, a community. They lived together in a place just outside of Cust called Springbank, and they lived there until the 90s before they moved the entire community to a remote location on the west coast of the South Island. I think, in fact, in my next video that I do, I might bring up Google Earth, Google Maps, and show you some of those locations, so that will make a bit more sense as to how the change from the Springbank to the west coast and how isolated this community became, and that was a deliberate, intentional decision and a move. So my concern around Neville Cooper was the system that he established, where he had the say in every aspect of what happened in this community from its inception to, even though he's deceased, that he's still having an influence in this community and on what the leadership teach, how they direct their members to live their lives, right down to how long a woman will have with a child before she returns to work, what women, men, children wear, where they will eat, every aspect that you can imagine of their lives, right down to birth control. And that may or may not surprise you. So, as I said, Hopeful Christian, born as Neville Cooper, established this group, and very quickly this group started to come to the concern of members of the public, especially those of us living in North Canterbury, and then eventually to the authorities. So Neville Cooper and his first wife Gloria had a large number of children, in excess of 10, I think it might be 12. All that information is available. It's easy to locate. A number of his children had already left the community. So one of his children was married to a man who, so the daughter's married to a man who was a principal of a local school, and our children began attending that school in the 90s. So you can see it didn't take long for problems to really start emerging in this group. So from like 1969, 1970s, by the 80s, things were really starting to become difficult and challenging for some people, and leading to a number of his own daughters, his own sons, leaving this group. Tragically, one son in the 90s self-deleted due to all the experiences that this young person had gone through, both in being born and raised under Neville Cooper's teachings, but also the immense distress around the decision to leave and what leaving means for someone who's born and raised in this group. So Neville Cooper establishes himself as using a title called the Overseeing Shepherd. So the overseeing shepherd, essentially, if you compare that to not just a priest or a minister, really like a bishop having oversight of everything. What he said, I suppose Pope might even be closer. What he said goes. I've talked to numerous people over the years who have been born and raised in this group, and uh, their understanding of the overseeing shepherd's role, and especially Neville Cooper's in the initial formation of the system, was that he was between them and God. So God was speaking directly to Neville Cooper. So therefore, what Neville Cooper said and directed and said this is the way we're going to do things, they understood was coming directly from God. So in the second video that I talked about the claim that is made on their own website that you can read today, that it was in 1974 when they started to have home births in Springbank, that started the home birth movement in New Zealand. And now New Zealand women have home births as an option, I suppose, thanks to them. So I delved into that and tried to find, was there any factual basis to this? Has anyone else referenced that had an influence in this movement, that people were looking at what was happening in Springbank at the time, thinking, wow, this is great. We want that too for ourselves. We want it. So I showed you in that video a link to a website called New Zealand History, which has an essay on the history of the New Zealand Home Birth Association, which clearly states that prior to 1974, home births in New Zealand were occurring and the demand for it was increasing, which was in part leading to the change that allowed more women to choose and midwives to take more of a lead role in births in New Zealand. The website, the New Zealand History website, also interestingly links the growth and the demand for home births in New Zealand in the 70s to the women's liberation movement, that it was clearly linked to women claiming their autonomy and their right to be involved in decisions around giving birth. So you can see all of that more in more detail in that second video. So let's go on to this third video. We would want to have a look at Neville Cooper. So Neville Cooper, first wife Gloria. I'll find out some information on when she passed away. But in the 1990s, so let's have a look. I'll just have a look. I'm not going to share this particular screen. I'm not going to put it up. As I've mentioned before, I'm using a Zoom platform because that's an easy way for me to share websites, documents, etc. I'm familiar with it. I'm just not sure how to do that directly on YouTube or any other platform. So that's why I'm using this one. But I'm not going to share this one because this is related to, I'm going to use the letters SA, specific harm to women and children. So if you're not sure what I mean by SA or child SA, feel free to contact me and I will explain that, but it's just not appropriate to broadcast that in a public domain such as YouTube. So let's go. So this article describes in some graphic detail the nature of Neville Cooper's criminal offences. So yes, that's right. So if you remember, so I met Neville Cooper sort of in the late 80s. So this is prior to all of this. I became concerned because of the way he spoke to me and his direct statements, not telling me what he believes, but trying to tell me this is a statement of fact. It's a fact. It's just the way it is. So by 1994, Neville Cooper has been arrested. He's been charged and he was convicted. So think about that timeline. That's not a long time. So by the time I had personally met Neville Cooper and had my interaction with him, potentially attention was already coming to the police because it takes time for investigations to occur, for people to be interviewed, for evidence to be gathered, for a case, a prosecution case to be put together, for that to be presented, to go through a process such as deposition hearings. These hearings can take a year, even from the time it starts in the course process to actually going to court. So during the entire time that Neville Cooper was under investigation, was charged with these criminal offences, and then underwent a criminal hearing, he denied. He denied that any of this occurred. And even after the fact, even after he was found guilty, denied. And I've spoken to numerous adults who were in Gloriavale at the time that this all occurred, and at the time he was released from prison. They were told not about the essay or the child essay. They were told that Neville Cooper had been persecuted for his beliefs, for what he believed, that all of this was around a conspiracy to shut down this community, this group, that this was a religious persecution. And many of the adults that I've spoken to who, since on leaving this group, the Gloriavale Christian community, and when they have had access to information and access to things like court records and affidavits, etc., news articles, that's when they've learnt the truth. And didn't shock them or surprise them by this stage how much they'd been lied to, misinformed, misled deliberately. And this finding out the true nature of the conviction and what occurred had a huge impact, in the sense that it reinforced how every aspect of what they've been told they could not trust. The harm of that has led directly to many of these adults explaining to me, especially when I'm in a therapy, doing a therapeutic interventional work with these people, that they struggle to this day, like 6 years later, 10 years later, of leaving. They still struggle to trust. They still question, who can I trust? A huge distrust for authority figures, reluctance to seek help, even when they're outside of this community. That is how much this group has had an impact on people's lives. Look at me. That was my phone vibrating. So what I want to read to you, so this is in 1994. So the charges, he was found guilty. So a jury, pretty sure it was a jury. Don't think it was a judge alone trying it. Pretty sure it was a jury. In New Zealand, we have a jury of 12, 12 people who hear all the evidence, who weigh that evidence and come to a unanimous decision. If it was judge alone, I stand corrected, but I'm fairly confident this would have been a jury trial. In fact, there it is. It's there right in front of me. He was, after being found guilty by a jury, he was found guilty of 10 counts of indecent assault between 1980 and 1984 against 5 young complainants. So just let that sink in. So those of us who work clinically in the space of trauma and SA know that individuals really struggle to come forward and make a disclosure. And more often than not, it's very difficult for children too. And often these disclosures are made by adults, young adults. And this seems to be what's occurring, especially once they left the community, they were able to have their voice. Those of us that clinically or researchers, experts in this area, and rest assured, I don't claim to be an expert in this area, but I do work in this area and read a lot in this area. Um, Researchers and experts will tell us that the number of victims who come forward that lead to a criminal case and eventually conviction is the tip of the iceberg. That there will be many more victims who either were not able to come forward, or who may have come forward, but there may have been a lack of evidence, sufficient evidence to support specific charges. So the prosecution office often will make a decision around which of the cases they will take forward with confidence of obviously not certainty because that's up to the jury, but having greater confidence of being successful in prosecution. I have been involved in a number of cases where the police have investigated a disclosure, and I can speak directly to that on one case where a young person disclosed in therapy to myself around an adult who had harmed this young person in that way. The young person underwent an evidential video interview. So that's a specific interview that will be used as part of the evidence. It says it in his name, doesn't it? These evidential video interviews are conducted by professionals who are specifically trained to do these interviews. The questions are asked in such a way that these videos can be relied on as evidence in a criminal hearing. So this young person went through that process and was thankful to have done that and be able to have his voice heard. A criminal investigation began, and the police were investigating. And however, while the detective who contacted me around this case, because I had been the person to, with the young person's consent, contact the police to alert them of this issue. So the police were reporting back to me that there was sufficient public interest to proceed with an investigation and eventually charges. However, the age of the perpetrator and the stress of this led to the perpetrator suffering an extensive heart attack, and the police, because of his frailty and likelihood he would not survive for much longer because of his heart disease, they chose not to proceed with the prosecution. So these things can happen. So the number of charges, the number of convictions that any perpetrator might face can be so many contributing factors. So back to my point, because I'm rambled off again, is that 10 charges, 5 young victims, and that's likely to have been the tip of the iceberg. And in fact, I've heard from others who also were victims of Neville Cooper's essay and who were not part of this. Okay, and I will talk about how that's influenced the behaviour of other male leaders in this community. So he's convicted. So initially, he is sentenced to 6 years prison. So I say initially, because after appealing that sentence, the sentence reduced by 1 year to 5 years. Now, it says in this news article, and I'm looking at, if you Google it, you'll find this yourself. It's a news article on the Radio New Zealand website. Radio New Zealand is recognised in New Zealand to be one of the reliable media sources of information and news outlets. And it states here that he was aged between 53 and 57 at the time of the offending. As a clinical psychologist, I find that particularly relevant because you just don't wake up at 53 thinking, okay, this is what I'm going to start doing. So there was likely a whole series of behaviours that led towards these specific offences. It gives me greater confidence that there were more than likely other victims of Neville Cooper's offending who, for whatever reason, have not come forward or they weren't part of that court case. So think of that 53 and 57. And remember that Neville Cooper had established this church, this group, where he had sole control. So think of that. So how vulnerable were these victims in this particular group? And I found this comment by Judge Noble at the time of hopeful Christian Neville Cooper's sentencing really, really, really relevant in terms of why this particular judge had given a sentence of 6 years. He said, Judge Noble, all of the young complainants were members of your flock, conditioned to do your bidding. Yours was the pervasive influence on the lives of all of these young people. Now, the judge would have used the word flock deliberately. It's not a coincidence. Remember, the title that Neville Cooper took for himself in this community was overseeing shepherd. Under him in this system, so you have Neville Cooper overseeing shepherd. Under him were other shepherds, and then under the shepherds are servants. All of these are men. These are deemed to be positions of authority and responsibility within the community, and women are not part of that leadership. Women do not attend these meetings that these men hold. Women do not contribute to the decisions and the outcomes that are made. And Neville Cooper set himself as overseeing shepherd. The judge goes on, and that I will redact some words again, just for the appropriateness of not broadcasting this publicly, but you can read that for yourself if you search for this news article. So the judge goes on, within the influence were orthodox preachings and teachings, but combined with your bizarre activities in relation to the complainants. So quite clearly the judge is linking Neville Cooper's orthodox, and I use the word fundamental, teachings to his offending. I remember in that second video, I did look at the biblical text reference on the Global Christian Community website, and that was 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 15. So his teachings and his preaching is directly linked to his offending. The judge goes on, I find that the evidence was overwhelming that you used and abused your position of trust, power, and dominion over them to SA the complainants, while professing to do these things to relieve their tensions and or to prepare them for life or prepare them for marriage, all the while telling them not to tell. Those of us who work in this space clinically have heard similar things from other victims of SA before, where the victim is told not to tell, there's coercion, there's grooming, told this is for you, you enjoy this too. So here is Neville, and the evidence was overwhelming that he was saying within his position of power over these young people, I am doing this to help you. This is to relieve your tension. This is to prepare you for adult life and for marriage, especially for the woman or the female victims. And one victim in particular was physically harmed by Neville Cooper's SA as he used an object, leaving her with injuries. Think on that. This is a man who, if you look at the documentaries, if you look at any of the videos that this group put, because they have put some on YouTube, he's held up to be this esteemed leader. He's presented as being so caring and just wanting all the best for all of his flock. And the judges just said, no, you don't. You were using your position to harm. You took advantage of the trust that young people and their parents had instilled in you, and you used it for your own gratification. So this is 1994. So this is nearly years after I had met Neville Cooper. And I recall at the time watching on the news, there was news footage. Journalists must have had a heads up that a raid was being conducted on the Springbank community. You can see that in some documentaries where the police arrive, a large number of police arrive on the community. Again, I might show you if I do that. I might do it, but there were two roads bordering the community. So there's the main road, and then at the time it was a shingle road, and the police arrive unannounced, causing it would have been really traumatic and distressing for all involved, and recovered a large amount of material, including videos. Yes, there were videos. They did a lot of videoing. Apparently, a lot of videoing, all sorts of things, but apparently there were video footage. So the police arrive, and on the documentary Devotion, the glory of our story, one of the leaders, current leaders, so remember this is in the 90s, and he's still talking about it, how it was an overreaction by the police. He references to the cult Waco, Texas. You may remember that, where after a siege event of days, there was shooting, there was guns involved, there was tragedy. The members of the cult deliberately set the building on fire, and children and women and adults died as a result of that. So he said it was overreaction, and they linked to that. I want to challenge that. So remember, this is North Canterbury. So I think it was even prior to that, it might have been late 80s, that there was another group in North Canterbury, maybe you call it another cult. It's not as well known, and it closed down around that time. Maybe I should do some more fact finding around this. But again, I had a bit of personal recollection or interaction. So as a young person, so this would have been what, mid-70s, yeah, mid-70s. We would go on youth group camps to this place, Waipara, in North Canterbury, and we were at a camp, and across the road, on the same road, so almost across the road, was this community. They were known as Camp David, and it was, I still remember the white concrete. It was painted white, but it was a concrete block fence. It was sort of like almost like a castle type formation on its top, surrounding them. And they were known to have guns, and they were shut down. So remember, this is around the 80s, so in the years prior to this, the police did a raid to them because they had an enormous stash of weapons, and their teaching was around that Armageddon type experience of the end of the world, and they were going to have to protect themselves and use guns, because that sort of survival thing. So that raised concerns, and when the police did their raids, there were many illegal weapons. And again, I might look that up and make sure I'm speaking factually. That's my recollection. Also, do recollect that when we were on one occasion at the camp across from Camp David, we were playing a fantastic game that we used to play in the evening, in the night, called Storming the Heights. It's where you've got two groups and they've got flags and you have to try to get the other group's flag. And I recall we were coming from the riverbed, sort of going up the hill, quite a steep hill through the bush, to where the plateau was, and then the main camp where we were staying was above that. So we were some distance away from the main camp, but we'd snuck around. We thought really clever, go down to the riverbed and then make our way up the steep bank. And as we were doing that, gunshots. Yep, gunshots rang, just exploding all around us. We were terrified. We ran literally for our lives. Up the bank, got to the leaders of our camp, told them the police were called. I recall the police coming on site, and the people from Camp David said they were simply out on the riverbed rabbit shooting. But you don't shoot rabbits in the bush going up a hill because you can't see. So that's my personal experience of that group. And so back to pushing back against this documentary, which has sort of spurred me to put these posts up. This person was saying, hey, it was an overreaction, and they came in and they treated us as if we were Waco, Texas, like the group from Waco, Texas. And I'm like, well, there was a group just kilometres away who did have guns. How would the police know? So was it an overreaction? I say no. My opinion, not an overreaction. My opinion, possibly even was an underreaction because I didn't remove the children. And I think at the time there was sufficient evidence to say these children are not safe here. There is risk of harm to these children, but that's just my opinion. So I don't think it was an overreaction, it was an underreaction. Okay, so we had Neville Cooper in 1994, sentenced to prison for 5 years. He served 11 months. He was released from prison after serving 11 months of a 5-year sentence. Where does he go after that? He returns to the Gloriavale Christian community, which in this time is now firmly established on the west coast of the South Island. As apparently the Springbank location was too public. It was too easy for people to come in. For instance, the police, child protection services, members of the public, fathers who wanted to save their children, rescue their children and their family and remove them from this group. So they moved and they welcomed Neville Cooper back as leader. He continued in his role as overseeing shepherd after being found guilty for criminal offences in his role as overseeing shepherd and using that position for his own gratification. Now, I am going to finish off this video there because there's a lot more than I need to say about this, but I do need to take a break. So I will see you soon. So, ka kite and talk soon.